So, good morning, everybody. We got Bruce Rawls and Lynn Johnson here, and we are reading Absence from Felicity, book by Dr. Kenneth Wapnick, and it's all about the scribing of A Course in Miracles and Dr. Helen Schuckman and Bill Thetford and all the wacky uh, adventures they had while while scribing.
Pretty amazing stuff, actually. Yeah,
Yeah, really pretty amazing.
but ours is really amazing too. Every story is really incredible, which means difficult to believe in truth, right?
That's funny. Oh, look what I thought that would put it on 2 pages, but it actually just made two little skinny pages.
Two columns, yeah.
Okay,
So
well,
I have us on the bottom of page 99. So we're moving at a pretty good clip compared to our previous readings.
yes, we are. And someone was mentioning the other day, Lydia Houston was reading the intro to the lifetimes when Jesus and Buddha knew each other,
Yeah.
because that's such a beautiful introduction to A
Oh,
Course
yeah.
in Miracles.
Sure it is.
And so she read that yesterday, and it was just, and I told her, you and I had read that entire book,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking I'm going to figure out some way to put those recordings on YouTube.
Well, I mean, I keep saying this, but actually, it's getting truer all the time. I'm actually starting resuming. This week even I resumed work on my third book, so I actually should have more free time to do other projects like our huge backlog of audio recordings. So
Well, good.
I
Well,
can assist with that, and unless we should talk offline about that. How we can
yes, we shall.
best
Yes,
make that
we
happen.
shall.
Yeah.
So we've been reading about visions that Helen had, and dreams and visions. And these things that came to her were quite startling.
Mhm, mhm.
And I like the word. Jesus does use the word quite startling. And he's talking about the lessons, and just was reading what was it I was reading? I can't remember. Oh yeah, from the manual for teachers, in the section about our psychic powers desirable, and
Mhm.
he was and Jesus uh points out in there that uh that if we would be just so amazed, and it would just be so shocking and amazing to us to suddenly be able to see the light, see the truth,
Mhm.
and how happy we would be, how happy we would be, and yet we like to sit here and cry over nothing. But anyway, so Helen was.
Actually, what you just read reminded me of something that I looked up. What was it, in the last day or two? I'm going to find it again because it's easy to find. And the phrase is glad astonishment. And the quote is from chapter 16, section 6, paragraph 11. I'll just read that whole paragraph because it's give a little more context. The new perspective you will gain from crossing over from ego to Holy Spirit consistently, I would say, or something equivalent to that, will be the understanding of where heaven is. From this side, it seems to be outside and across the bridge. Yet as you cross to join it, it will join with you and become one with you. And you will think in glad astonishment that for all this, you gave up nothing. The joy of heaven, which has no limit, is increased with each light that returns to take its rightful place within it. Wait no longer for the love of God and you. And may the holy instant speed you on the way, as it will surely do if you but let it come to you. So every time that we are tempted to feel discouraged about how long the course is taking, won't it hurry up, please? and help me be consistently peaceful. Well, it's really a reminder that it's sooner or later we will want to do what the course says and actually practice it consistently and get consistent results, and then we will have that experience of glad astonishment that we didn't have to give up anything.
Exactly.
We're not there yet, so that's why we just need to be very gentle and patient with ourselves as we look through of all our projections and all the crankiness and the silliness and the absurdities of our dream world, and that seem to be outside of us that are really in our mind, and just say, oh yeah, well, I guess there must be part of me that's still afraid of that all-encompassing love, and that's okay, because it's a happy inevitability that I will return to it, as will everyone.
That's right. A happy inevitability. I love that. And I'm just asking folks on Pal Talk if they can hear. I just put on. I'm broadcasting our live through there, so I'm pretty sure they can. So, and if they can't, well, they don't know what they're missing. That's what my mom always
Really?
would say.
Really?
If you don't like this, you don't know what you're missing. Well, yeah, because I don't know, because I don't know. I'm
Because we're
missing.
so far down the rabbit hole, we've forgotten what the light is. We're just groping around in the dark for little crumbs and bugs, trying to survive on that.
A little spoonbill down there digging up bugs and things. That's all right. Let's see. So,
I saw a spoonbill heron in Costa Rica, and it was a most unusual looking bird. And a guide named Beto, with a 60 powered monocular telescope, set it up in the thick of the jungle with a towering jungle canopy over us. And he said, "See that bird up there?" And I said, "No." And he pointed and he said, "See it there, right there?" I said, "No." And then he set up his 60 power scope, and the bird filled the view. And it's like, wow, what an interesting looking bird. But I couldn't. Then I looked away and looked right up where I was looking at through the scope, and I still couldn't see it. And I tried that like 2 or 3 times. It's like, wow, it's like the good eyes. But
oh yeah, and looking through a telescope, I mean, I spent a lot of time looking through telescopes and microscopes because I studied astronomy and biology.
uh-huh.
In order to actually see the thing, you have to spot the thing first, and then you can enlarge it. If you enlarge something or
Oh,
telescope,
right, of course.
you're going to look and look and look forever, and you'll never
Hmm.
never see what you're looking for
Yep.
because the range is so wide
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
light is so
Yeah.
dispersed that that's one of those things you have to focus on it first, look at it first, and then you can maybe see what it is. But
Another reminder that we don't see the whole picture here. We just see our little myopic view of so-called reality. Huh?
exactly. So let me just check.
No wonder we have little conflicts that seem to be inside and some outside, and a never-ending parade of crazy conflicts of one sort or another. Huh?
Crazy. Yep.
Should I pick up where we left off?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, I
We're
have
on
us on
series 2.
series 2. Yeah, this
Good.
is, and then Ken continues his narration. The second series, like the first, came to Helen in, quote, short glimpses, rather like daydreams, and sometimes in sleeping dreams, unquote. The pictures included Bill in what would appear to have been past life situations. It is not necessary, however, for the reader to believe in reincarnation. See the manual, page 57F, for example, is referring to is reincarnation. So I'm sure. On one level, Helen did not allow herself to believe in it, though her letters to Bill from this period belie her usual assertion of disbelief. Be that as it may, the subject certainly made her most uncomfortable. But if nothing else, the various images do reflect symbolically the strongly ambivalent nature of Helen and Bill's relationship. Oh, this is this is helpful. Okay, and then here's Helen's commentary. We, in brackets, Helen and Bill, turned up together in various relationships, although the actual chronology was quite confused. Situation which seemed to be quite ancient often came after almost contemporary ones. Many of the episodes struck me as essentially allegorical even at the time. I saw myself in a boat, frantically rowing but getting nowhere. Looking about, I identified the place as Venice and the boat as a gondola. Gondola, however you say it. nearby, a tall, thin man, very reminiscent of Bill, was leaning casually against a striped wooden post that protruded from the water. His arms were folded across his chest, and he watched me with mock seriousness. I grew more and more certain he was Bill when I noticed his eyes. He was dressed as a gondolier with gleaming sequins scattered across his shirt. He neither moved nor spoke. Then I noticed the gondola was tied to a wharf with a heavy rope. It was a silly situation. I was working hard at the impossible. Now, now there's a sentence that describes all of us all the time, huh?
Exactly.
Or pretty close to all the time. We're making some breakthroughs and some progress here and there. Okay, Bill said nothing, but it was evident that he regarded my efforts as amusing. He did not offer to help me, although his smile was not unkind. Well, what a great, just that first paragraph is wonderful. Okay, I'll continue though.
That is pretty funny because it's like a lot of her perception about Bill
Mm-hmm.
in the way that they experience themselves in their life. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he's watching and seeing, but he's not really helping.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny.
Although maybe he's really helping by not buying into Helen's dream of immobility.
Exactly. And it's something I noticed about this
Ineffectuality.
paragraph as you were reading was when she was saying that um, uh, situations which seem to be quite ancient often came after almost contemporary ones, is because every situation in the dream is happening simultaneously. So
Mm-hmm.
she could be seeing into a past, or she could be seeing, it's all imaginary. All
That's
these
true.
things are
So,
imaginary. So
so
they're all
true.
happening at one time.
Yep.
And so, and time has no meaning in the dream.
Yeah, the belief in linear time is just such an unchallenged assumption, isn't it? And yet I mean, I rarely challenge it. And as you were saying that, I was thinking, oh yeah, that's right. That's just a concept I made up, and everyone made up. Yeah, but yeah, it's all happening at once. Everything, everywhere, all at once, like the movie title says,
Did you
suggests,
see
right?
that movie yet?
I did. It was fun. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. It's kind of wacky and a little bit, just like you're wondering what in the heck is going on here. But
Yeah.
when you see the whole picture, it's very clear that it's her higher self that is come back in, or come into the dream,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of guide her through all these adventures, and bring about, a peaceful solution to her situation. I loved, I mean, all the possibilities. That's what was so beautiful about it, was that you got to see all the possibilities, or not all of them, but many different possibilities of the same person in different situations. And yeah, you can go and learn martial arts and become a great karate expert, just so you can come into this dream here and fight a
And
big
deal with
fight,
your tax returns, right?
deal with your tax returns. And you can fall in love with your tax lady and become
Who has big
hot,
rubbery fingers?
hot dog fingers.
If this doesn't make any sense, go see the movie, and then you'll know why we're being silly.
Yeah, really, honestly, it really, if you're just looking for a wacky adventure, it's
Yeah,
fun. But if
Jamie Lee Curtis's cameo is just priceless. Yeah,
she's
yeah.
amazing, did she win an Academy Award for
I
that?
think maybe I hope she
Yeah, I
did.
think
Well,
she did.
I can't remember, but it was
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she.
such a fun performance. So,
Yeah, such a fun performance, and all of them. I mean, everybody in there was just so brilliant, and
mhm.
so,
Oh yeah,
but the whole point of it, and the guys who made it, their whole, I mean, they're trying to tell us something um about our reality,
mhm, mhm.
crazy and jumbled as it is.
Yep.
Okay, so you want to continue reading or want me to read?
Why don't you pick up where we
Okay,
left off?
all right. So the next events in this series are quite vague. I love it. She puts Bill in first she puts him in a gondolier outfit with sequins, and the next events in the series are quite vague. Bill turned up as a bullfighter in a spectacular costume, gold from head to foot, and there was a dim impression of an arena in the background. He appeared next as a witch doctor with feathers around his ankles and wrists, dressed in a straw skirt and wearing an imposing headdress, bright feathers and gleaming jewels.
Pardon my laughter. I'm just thinking, well, there's Helen's imagination and all of ours, I suppose. And but she's probably doing the equivalent of what people needed to do before HGTV's International House Hunters and Rick Steves' travel logs. It's like, well, if you can't travel there virtually with television or movies or whatever, you can always do it with your mind, right?
Do it with your mind and dress up people however you
Go from
you
Venice to
perceive them.
Madrid to somewhere in Africa, and we're guessing it.
Oh yeah. Well, she says, okay. So she says, he appeared next as a witch doctor with feathers around his ankles and wrists, dressed in a straw skirt and wearing an imposing headdress of bright feathers. This is straight out of the movies, and gleaming jewels. I wore a simple homespun dress. We were both black. We were standing facing each other in a clearing in a thick jungle, and I seemed to have come to him for help. He was responding to my appeal with a weird dance, accompanied by loud cries in a language I did not understand. At first, I felt this would help me and briefly experienced a sense of comfort. Then I grew afraid and begged him to stop. He did not seem to hear me, though, through the increasingly loud banging of the crude wooden instruments he was holding and the loud beating of drums in the background. I crept away terrified, holding my hands over my ears in a frantic effort to shut out the noise. I was now in a state of real terror and did not look back. There was no conclusion. So wow, yeah. I mean, first she dresses up Bill in all these fantastic costumes that are like straight out of the movies and very, if you were a gay man in the 60s, well, maybe something that people perceived as that, you were, doing something way outside of convention in fashion and whatever. But in all of them, he did not hear her. He wasn't paying attention to her. He he was banging his drum and dancing around, and she crept away terrified, holding her hands over her ears. That is just so funny.
And so she was blotting out and trying to escape from her perceptions as well. So the denial was happening on both sides, it would seem.
Exactly.
There's a lack of communication, in other words. Yeah. And yet the only real communication that will ever satisfy us is when it's done under the auspices of the Holy Spirit's guidance, right?
That's the only real communication.
The forms are multitudinous, but the content is always, you're innocent, I'm innocent, and then there's the real communication.
Exactly. So she continues, the next episode involving Bill and me seemed like a story within a story. One theme in particular took about a week before reaching its grim conclusion. I wonder if that was a week in her imagination or an actual week. Well, we'll see. It was very clear I was a priestess in what looked like an Egyptian temple, although I had an idea it was much older. Huge stone statues were vaguely outlined along the sides and back of the building. They, obviously in brackets, obviously the statues were of figures, into brackets, were seated stiffly upright, with arms held tightly at the side and hands pressed against the knees. I could not make them out well because the interior of the temple was dimly lit. Even in the half-light, I could tell that the temple was enormous and extremely imposing. Although the whole temple seemed to be magnificent, the altar, the only brightly lit part of the temple, was particularly splendid. A blazing light shone down on it from a source I could not identify. Magnificent jewels glowed all around it, and its smooth, polished stone surfaces reflected the light like mirrors. As the high priestess, I was very elaborately dressed, wearing a heavily inlaid jeweled crown from which the large center stone was missing. Ooh, I sense Indiana Jones is on his way now. Um,
Really has that quality, doesn't it?
does. It's so
And this is
fun.
probably before those movies were made. So
Oh, it's way before that.
maybe she was having a precognitive
Oh,
experience.
that's
Yeah.
funny. I mean, I saw movies like this when I was a
Oh
kid.
yeah.
To make movies with all this kind of stuff in it.
Hmm.
So great fodder for the imagination. But
Yep.
also, I'm thinking about the altar being in her imagination, because when she was a little girl looking through the cracks in the door in the Catholic Church and seeing the altar, and I imagine, because I've seen many Catholic altars being right up there and lit up and ornate and beautiful. And but this is not like a Catholic Church altar. This is this is something different.
Hmm.
So she says in the opening quote scene, I was standing at the altar leaning over Bill, who lay on the floor almost naked. I was holding the shaft of a sharp spear. Its point was resting on Bill's forehead between his eyes. Then came an extended series of, quote, flashbacks, unquote, of the events that led up to the scene. There had been a slave uprising. I was about to kill Bill, the leader of the revolt. Oh, Quentin Tarantino got that
I was
movie.
gonna say, speaking of movies that she was precognitively titling, right?
I was about to kill Bill, the leader of the revolt, who had stolen the large center ruby from my crown. There he did it. It was not an ordinary ruby. It gave its wearer magical powers. The thief had to be killed if these powers were to return to me, the savage priestess whose religion was power and enslavement. The revolt against her was to ask for death. I cannot account for what happened next. I can only say that it was totally out of character. Like, this is all in character. It was
Well, pretty wild characters. Yeah.
all right. I can only say that it was totally out of character and completely unexpected. I felt an intense rage and vindictiveness as I prepared to plunge the point of the spear into Bill's head between his eyes. He did not seem to be particularly frightened. He merely looked up at me and waited. I braced myself, ready to bring the spear down, and hesitated just an instant. I knew it was all over with me. Bill would live and I would die. As I threw the spear down, my death was certain. So at the end, she made a choice to not kill Bill.
Hmm.
Wow. In the final episode, and because of that choice, she knew that she would have to die. Wow.
And because of that choice, that movie wasn't made as well as all of our movies. So, and this conversation never happened.
Yes, yes, yes.
But don't think about that too much.
No, really. That's only the crux of the whole story. It's the point of everything.
Point, pun intended.
Point, pun intended, yeah.
Yeah.
And as I was thinking it, she was going to put the spear down, and I'm imagining right where we imagine the third eye to be, which
Hmm.
is where people who do trepanation. Have you ever seen that?
Not sure.
Where people actually drill a hole in their forehead where
Hmm.
that third eye is supposed to be. And
Hmm.
they, I watched a whole video of a woman who did it to herself, and it was just bizarre.
I'd
You know,
open a window before doing that if I needed extra ventilation, but that's just me.
but yeah, so maybe if she plunged that spear into his third eye, he would have a revelation.
Mm.
Anyway, that's my story. Okay, in the final episode, I was standing alone on the top step of a wide stairway before an enormous bolted door. I was outside the temple. My crown was gone, and so was my magnificent robe. I was wearing a loose white dress, smudged down the sides and torn at the neck. In front of me was nothing but desert. The wind blew hot, dry sand against my face, and I could see the whitened bones scattered about in the distance. Mine would still soon be among them. I cursed myself bitterly for not killing Bill. I must have been insane. Anger literally shook me as I walked slowly down the stairway, with thirst already biting at my throat and the smell of death in the wind. Wow. um,
Seems
so
like she may have had a little history with Bill here, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You think?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. She's willing to give up her own life for him not to die. And she knew that. And what do they do with him then? Do they make him the high priest? Give him the robes and the scepter? I don't know. Probably not. They probably killed him anyway. Anyway, because you know how heathens are, uh, who have temples and jeweled headdresses. So you want to read on?
Sure. Let's see. Yeah. The emotional impact of this last episode was intense and long lasting. I felt the anger long after the images faded, and it later blazed into open fury as I told Bill the story at lunch the next day, particularly when I spoke of the theft of the ruby. I hope he said something like, wow, that was your dream, not mine. Just being silly, but it'd be interesting to know what his response. Maybe he will describe the response. Okay. It was that. Let me start that sentence over again. Okay. It was. Now we're on page 102. Was as if it were happening all over again. A crystal clear picture of the ruby, beautiful and blood red, rose before my eyes as I spoke. And for a brief period, the scene became reality for me. Again, I berated myself for dying for a rebellious slave who was nothing but a common thief. I could barely contain my fury at Bill, who was understandably upset. So was I. The intensity of my anger was quite startling to both of us. And then in brackets, my italics. Okay, and so then Ken continues. When Helen and I discussed this episode many years later, I was surprised to find remnants of this specific anger still within her. She described to me one earlier attempt on Bill's part to be nice to her, and she shot back to him that it was, quote, too little and too late, unquote. for and making amends for her dream, right? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And boy, don't we do that.
Well,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
But I think that the thing is, we may, fairly quickly sometimes when after we wake up, biologically, physically, even from nocturnal dreams, whatever you want to call that. And yet we forget that, as the Course says, all our time is spent in dreaming. And our waking and sleeping dreams have different forms, but that's all. It's the content's the same, right? Excuse me. The content being that we believe that the separation happened. We believe that we were able to fragment perfect oneness and take pure undifferentiated awareness and divide it up and make separate, warring and lonely, isolated parts that feel terribly guilty of this impossible crime that they think they've committed, right?
Right, exactly. And it's the same thing. We're using the contents of the dream to attack our brother, to attack the innocent. Even though in the dream he was a thief, in this dream he was her colleague and friend.
Yeah.
But she still carried it.
And all sadism is ultimately masochism, because if everyone exists in each seeming individual's mind, then the only war we can have is against ourselves.
Yeah, chapter 23. So
yeah, that too.
that too. All right, you want to continue?
Sure. The quote. Oh, well, no, I didn't read the next paragraph, did I? Or finish that paragraph. Let's see. Yeah, okay. I'll read the previous sentence again. She described to me one early attempt on Bill's part to be nice to her, and she shot back to him that it was, quote, too little and too late. It seemed largely a result of this experience that Helen felt justified in blaming Bill, as mentioned before, not only for her present woes, but for all of her past ones as well, including the almost 49 years she lived before ever meeting him. Now, there's logic has left the building. Yeah.
It's hilarious.
Isn't that? Yeah. But in a sense, don't we all do that in different ways? I mean, if you think about it,
Ooh.
it's like we use generalization very inappropriately in a world of separation.
Well, yeah, and to think about it in your life, I mean, well, not you, I can't say you because I don't know if you
Oh,
do
I
this.
probably do. Go ahead,
Probably
say
do.
you.
But yeah, if you had a bad experience with, say, for instance, again, here's the story of the Karen.
Uh-huh.
We had a bad experience with a person who, complained about things and caused problems and whatever. And then, weeks later, you see someone in a store that resembles them and they start saying something that you think is that, and right away you attack them. In your
Mhm.
mind, you're looking, you stupid blah blah. You probably voted for blah blah blah, and you're probably thinking about this, and you didn't even get vaccinated, and blah blah blah. You go into a whole story that is the person is completely innocent, and you're blaming them for something in the past that occurred that you just have not forgiven. So that's the whole point of it is, if you don't forgive what seems to occur, then it's going to come back to you over and over and over, lifetime after lifetime.
Again and again and again.
Yep. Then you have to keep up those feathers because they do not they don't last throughout the time. Anyway, go ahead, continue on.
Okay. Let's see. I don't think I even finished the paragraph again, did I? Okay. Okay. The extent of her anger, not to mention hatred, was truly alarming, reminiscent of her later experience of hate in London, described above in chapter 2. And now continues again further. The quote, one or the other, unquote, motif, quote, Bill would live and I would die, unquote, plays an important role in the ego's thought system, as A Course in Miracles would later explain. And it was a most important theme in Helen's ego life as well. It came in different forms. A prominent one, to which we shall return, was that Helen would help others, but always feeling sacrificial, as if she were giving up something of herself. Well, isn't that true of everyone's allegedly altruistic motivations when really just driven by ego to try to achieve something that's impossible in this world, right?
Yeah, exactly. And excuse me. It just over and over and over. If you look at your life and you see that, you know exactly what Jesus is talking about in the course, and you know exactly what the cause of it is. And yet each one seems to have a different cause. But the reality of it is, it's all the same cause, and the effect is just a variation of of the same story.
Yep. Yep. And it's never resolved until we get to the root. Right? Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Let me start that over again. Well, I'll pick up where I left off, actually, I think it was. And it was a most important theme in Helen's ego life as well. It came in different forms. A prominent one to which we shall return was that Helen would help others, but always feeling sacrificial, as if she was giving up something of herself. Another form was that it was extremely difficult for Helen to love two people at the same time. Psychologically, one had to live, the other die. Important pairs in her life in which this was played out included her parents, her mother and Louis, Louis and Bill, Bill and me and Louis. There's a whole bunch of pairs. Yeah. And all of these, Helen's love and attention could be expressed only to one of the two, never to both simultaneously. Well, there's a schism I think we can all relate to in so many different ways, right? This dynamic plays an important role in the ego's defense against God's love, which knows only total acceptance of all his children, without exception and without loss of any kind to anyone. Wow.
Yeah.
That
And
without loss of any kind to anyone, that qualifier pretty much puts the kibosh on just about every kind of ego, quote, affection, unquote, that we think is genuine, but really it's like, maybe that's not really what the course is aiming at. Maybe that's not the capital L love above the line in Ken's chart, so to speak.
yeah, and the whole idea that that the sacri that giving is sacrifice
Mhm.
is a huge concept in the course that you have to come to understand that what you give you receive, and so you lose nothing, and sacrifice is not possible.
Mhm.
But if you think that there can only be one, that can only be one way, like I can either love you or love my husband, I mean, it cuts out 99.9999999% of all the people on the planet, because there's I can't do both.
Mhm.
And in order to even to do for you, I have to give up a part of myself. And of course, if you think that you have to give up a part of yourself with every love you give, then how could you love more than one? You would be depleted and you would lose everything. So, this is a fear that we have, is I can't love the world and love my family. I can't love God and love the world. I mean, there's this whole idea that one has to be given up over another, and that the idea of sacrifice is key to the ego's thought system.
Mhm. Yeah, it's implicit really in any kind of duality, because as long as we identify with part of the whole, um, we've sacrificed our awareness of the oneness. The oneness hasn't ever been changed, because perfect oneness can't be attacked or modified or altered in any way. But our awareness of it certainly can, and that's only because our minds are powerful and we have been prone to dreaming. And in our case, for a long, long time, we've believed that it's possible to dream about more than one thing, and it's like, well, that hasn't worked out very well, has it?
No, it
Because
hasn't.
then we have all these dichotomies, like Helen's, uh, you know, uh,
One or the other.
parents, mother and Louis, Louis and Bill, Bill and me and Louis. Okay, so anyway, so all the different permutations, and if you figure 8 billion plus just in the human forms on this planet alone, that's, like you're saying, Lynn, it's like that's a lot of dichotomy going on.
Yeah, and it really is impossible for the mind to contain all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, but that's
Ego
because,
mind, anyway. Yeah.
yeah, the ego mind
Yeah.
is because we really underestimate and we don't recognize the power and the and what the mind does contain.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, you want me to continue?
Sure.
Okay. So King continues. It took a while before Helen was able to let the next experience in this series come to her mind. She had been sharing these inner events with Bill on a daily level. And, quote, it was almost as though we had to recover a little before going on, end quote. Though the next image was also negative in its outcome, it did lack the intensity of the previous one. Excuse me.
Sure.
So sorry, I'm having allergies. So here's the next one. Bill, a Franciscan monk dressed in a brown robe and sandals, was walking up and down an arched monastery corridor, intent on a book. The corridor was one of the four sides bordering on a small, well-kept green lawn. There was a lovely fountain in the middle, with birds bathing in the basin, and rows of bright flowers around its base, and scattered in patches across the grass. The time was uncertain, but the place seemed to be in Spain. I was walking slowly down the corridor toward Bill, dressed in heavy black. My face was veiled, my eyes were cast down, and my hands were clasped as if in prayer. When I reached Bill, I knelt before him as a penitent and very humbly asked him for forgiveness. He did not look up. Anger took hold of me, and I rose and accused him of being an over intellectualized religious without a heart. Being an over intellectualized religious without a heart. He did not seem to hear me, merely continuing serenely with his reading. His eyes never left the book. I backed away in angry but helpless frustration. The picture faded out slowly and inconclusively. Man, and I can tell you, she was mad at Bill about this too. Wow. Anyway, what a jerk. Okay. This scene is this is Ken. This scene is reminiscent of much of what went on in Helen's mind regarding Bill, namely that he was insensitive to her needs, and moreover, that he was unaware of his own passive hostility. What followed was a return to the image of this most holy priestess, Helen's true self. So here's another Helen vision or experience. The next scene, in order of appearance, was so ancient that it seemed to be taking place at the very beginning of time. I was a priestess again, but of a very different kind. This priestess was, in fact, much like the one with the innocent eyes whom I had watched emerging from heavy chains into freedom. And in italics, she says, while I was certain this priestess was myself, I was somehow not quite at one with her, just as I could not completely identify with her previous likeness. That's the end of the italics. She was hidden from the world in a small white marble temple set in a broad and very green valley. I was not sure that her body was entirely solid. Actually, what I saw was a little more than an outline of a small, slender woman dressed in white, who never came further into the world than the doorway of a little room containing a plain wooden altar far against the far wall. A small flame burned on it, sending up a small, steady column of white smoke. The priestess stayed close to the altar, sitting on a low wooden stool, praying with closed eyes for those who came for her help. Oh, and I guess Ken put those italics in there. Okay, so okay. There were a number of episodes in this series. Sometimes I saw only the green valley outside the white temple. Sometimes there seemed to be no one there, but at other times the valley was filled with a huge column of people marching joyously together in rows that seemed to extend endlessly in both directions. I could feel a deep sense of freedom and unity in each one as he marched ahead to certain victory. I am not sure of the exact role the priestess had in their happiness, but I knew her prayers somehow made a vital contribution. I was also sure that people came to her for help from all over, some in fact from very far away. They did not, however, speak to the priestess directly. They knelt one by one at the ledge that ran around the low walls separating the inner and outer parts of the temple, stating their needs to a man who seemed like a sort of intermediary between the priestess and the world. He stayed in the enclosed space between the priestess and those who came for help. The man conveyed their needs to her. He played a crucial role in enabling the priestess to fulfill her function, and I insisted for a long time that he was not Bill, although at length I came to concede that he probably was. And so I think these are Ken's brackets. In a later vision of the same priestess, the man was Jesus, and see below. End of brackets. He was tall and thin, but I could not see his face clearly. When people told him what they needed, he went to the door of her room and said, "Priestess, a brother has come to your shrine. Heal him for me." She never asked for anyone's name nor for the details of his request. She merely prayed for him, sitting very quietly beside the flame on the altar. It never occurred to her that help would not be granted. She prayed for everyone in the same way and never really left God's side, remaining peacefully at the certain of his presence there in the room with her. She never really stepped into the world and was very quiet and very happy. She was so close to God that she was always aware of him. I was sure she was myself, and yet I was not sure. What was certain was that I watched her with great love. And Ken put that part in italics. So she's seeing herself as this marvelous priestess who was close to God and always aware of him and just getting messages from the world, entreating her for help. Excuse me, entreating her to connect to this God and to heal them or help them or do whatever it was that they needed. So she was the intermediary between the world and the this and Bill, whatever his role was, and the world. So quite a little complicated uh, crew there, but apparently, for some reason, people couldn't come directly to her with their problems, and they had to go through someone else. And I don't know if that means anything or not, but it seems significant compared to um, the rest of these in her real life.
Hmm.
So
As you're saying that, Lynn, it occurs to me, oh gosh, several decades ago before I really studied the course, I think I might have known about it, but I hadn't opened it. I remember in a different metaphysical group I was in, um, I we were talking about the word vicarious, and I looked it up in the dictionary, and vicar is like an intermediary, like it's sort of like a in line for the Pope kind of thing, but someone who's like a priest or a member of the clergy, um, like a minister or whatever. But it's someone who really acts as an intermediary between the masses and God. And I was thinking, well, that's because at the time I thought, well, gee, that's the problem, is that we have this intermediate rather than having a direct experience. And when I think about it, it's like, well, the Holy Spirit is in a sense an intermediary for us in the course's cosmology, if you will, in the sense that we're none of us are ready for a direct experience, and the course really describes the process of the course as an indirect approach. And I think that's because, we're all so afraid of a complete acceptance of the truth that we need to come at it, a little at a time in order to minimize the fear and to establish a comfort level with the idea of the innocence being all inclusive and, all encompassing and really beyond anything that we can imagine as space and time, right? But we're easing into it, and at our own pace, in a gentle, non-demanding, non-confrontational, but very authoritative um, presence that's in our minds. And I think that's why the course uses Jesus and Holy Spirit as symbols for that presence that we took with us into the dream of separation. And they become, in a sense, the intermediary until we're ready to completely identify with that awareness, at which point the whole idea of that intermediary is no longer needed, in the same way that the decision-making faculty in Ken Wapnick's metaphysical chart, that everything below the line in Ken's chart disappears at that point, where it talks about the top of the ladder metaphorically, or where God takes the final step. And I think that's, until we're at that point, until we have completely disidentified with the ego, we need that intermediary, and we need to identify more and more with it until it no longer seems like an intermediary. It's just an automatic response, right?
right, and when we come to identify with the Christ,
Yeah, yeah,
eventually we come to identify with the Christ, and there is no more intermediary, because
right.
there's nothing that stands between us and God. But in all of these situations, and she had a shaman that kept her from, the priest didn't pay attention, the gondolier didn't pay attention, all these supposed intermediaries, the ones that are supposed to be getting us to where we need to go,
Uh-huh.
weren't listening. And and she had that experience with the Catholic Church again, where a big part of a component of the Catholic Church is that the priest is the intermediary, and that you can go to him with your sins, and he will talk to God, and God will forgive you of your sins. So as a whole thing of, you can't reach God directly, which the Course says yes, you can. But for her at that time, it didn't appear that that was possible, and she needed these different symbols and figures to make sense of the world that she was experiencing. So do you want to read on
Sure.
the sentences? Is where we're at. right after.
Yep. The sentences in italics reflect, again, Helen's recognition that the priestess was herself, like we've just been talking about. And yet at the same time, she was not able to identify with her. There's that seeming intermediary, or the that transitional phase that we're all in. The otherworldly image of the priestess, quote, I was not sure that her body was entirely solid, unquote. Quote, she never really stepped into the world, unquote. The fact that she was, quote, hidden from the world, unquote, in an inner temple that people could not enter except through an intermediary suggests that her capital S self was not really there, but remained totally at one with God's love. Thus she, quote, never really left God's side, remaining peacefully certain of his presence there in the room with her. She was so close to God that she was always aware of him, unquote. This reflected the state of mind A Course in Miracles would later call the real world, in quotes mentioned earlier. Finally, the priestess's prayer anticipates the first principle of miracles with which the Course begins, that there is no order of difficulty among them. And on the first page of the text, she prayed for all the people, quote, in the same way, unquote, and, quote, never asked for anyone's name, nor for the details of his request, unquote. And it, a lot of quotes here, quote, never occurred to her that help would not be granted, unquote. For Helen, the priestess was truly the holiest person in the world, and Helen's experience of her was the reminder that she was that person, capital P, in parentheses, capital S self as well. A parallel experience in contrast, though, in content, excuse me, a parallel experience in content, though not in form, is described by Helen in a letter to Bill to be presented below in chapter 6. This vision involved a laurel wreath representing Helen's self disappearing into a light. So whenever I see that word, I think of Benny Hill and how there was a word ceremony, and how the honoree says, "I'd like to present you with this laurel, this wreath of laurel and hearty handshake." Yeah.
Yes. Laurel and Hardy handshake. Yep. I remember that too. How funny.
Just silly wordplay. Do you want to continue?
Sure.
Okay.
So the next episode returned Helen to Earth, as it were, to the quote, more usual antagonism between her and Bill. This time with Helen cast as the victimizer and Bill as the victim. Oh, here now the guilt is coming up. I can see it bubbling up. Okay. And this is a quote from Helen, the next episode was a dramatic contrast. Bill and I were now both slaves in what seemed to be mid-19th century America. We were married, but I was quite contemptuous of him. He was much older than I, much darker in skin coloring, and deeply religious in what I regarded as a very simple-minded way. I saw no justification for his childlike trust in God. He had a similarly naive trust in me. And for this, at least, I knew he had no reason. So yeah, that I experienced that a lot. That, I find myself when people seem to think that I am something or know something, or they have, even since I was a little child, it would bring up a sense of contempt in me for them that, obviously they don't know. And they're, I can't even imagine that they were being honest in saying that I was good or smart or cute or anything, because I was so contemptuous of myself. So when people would say things about me in a good way, I would just think they were idiots because they didn't know. And I think that's a lot of us have that experience, whether
Sure.
you admit to it or not.
And it doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on, if it could be a demeaning comment, and the similar assessment as well, they don't know me. But either way, it makes differences real. Right? It doesn't really matter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So she says, I saw no justification for his childlike trust in God. He had a similarly naive trust in me. And for this, at least, I knew he had no reason. The actual story was unclear, but I dimly sensed part of what was happening here. I was beautiful, almost white in appearance, and completely amoral. White men took to liking me, and I traded favors readily enough. I had managed to make a deal whereby I was to gain freedom by disappearing from the scene with the help of my white quote unquote friends. Bill would have to remain behind, a fact which caused me no concern whatsoever. I felt I was much above him, better educated and more attractive, and far more sophisticated. I had no use for his simple-minded religious notions. Wow, this is talk about contempt. I hid my plans from him until the very end. Then I enjoyed telling him about them. He did not condemn me or attempt to interfere. I turned my back on him and flounced out. But I remember the sadness in his eyes. Ooh, guilt, 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 guilt. Just, oh my God.
We've only got a minute left. Should we just wrap it
Oh
there
yeah,
for this
gosh,
week? Yeah.
time has come by so
Time
fast.
flies, doesn't it? Yeah.
Wowzers. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm going to put the bookmark there.
Yeah.
And
It was
thank
such
you.
interesting accounts today. Well, she's done a lot of world travel as well as
Time travel,
geographically and psychologically. Yeah.
time travel,
Yep.
and spiritual travel, and she's just been through all sorts of
All
adventures.
kinds of stuff.
Who
Yeah.
needs the movies when you can have visions of?
Really, really.
All right. Well, thank
Thanks,
you
Lynn, as
so much.
always. Yep.
I really appreciate you, Bruce, and
Oh,
look
likewise,
forward
likewise.
to seeing you next week.
Yeah. Have a
And
great week, all.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm going to, what am I going to do? I'm not going to do that.
Just have fun.
No, I'm not going to leave the meeting. What am I doing? I'm just
I will
kidding.
though. Have a great week, all.
All right.
And
See you later,
see you
Bruce.
next time. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. So let me stop the YouTube. Let's see. Did I? Okay. No, I didn't.